So I think everybody in this room will know what the initials NHS stand for. Yes, I get it. Does everybody know what the initials ICS stand for? Yes, anyone not sure what an ICS is? Okay, a few people don't know what an ICS is, so now's your chance to find out. Because our next speaker is Claire Fuller, the Chief Exec of Surrey Heartlands ICS. Not only is it been a leader of support for intergenerational activity, but Claire was also one of the designers of the whole ICS system, working with Amanda Pritchard and the team at NHS England. So welcome, Claire. Come to the stage. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks very much. So I nearly wore that jacket. And it was that would have just been a wee bit too much. So, so the last time I performed at the Royal Albert Hall, I was 15, and I was playing second flute in the Surrey County Youth Orchestra, and we were doing the Messiah, and I'd forgotten my music, and I spent the whole performance faking it. So I have to say. Well, no, you don't. Oh, I know. So no. Don't. Please don't applaud that. So I have to say, if there are any other second flautists around, you know that basically what you're just doing is playing what the first flute plays, probably down a third and down an octave from what the piccolo is doing. So it's not quite as clever as it sounds. So, but anyway, I feel slightly less stressed than I did on that day. If that makes you feel any better. So, hello, I'm Claire Fuller. I'm a GP. I think is how I would identify first and foremost. I've been a GP for more than 28 years, which is longer than I haven't been a GP, which is quite a significant milestone, really, I think, as these things go. And I'm also very proud to be the Chief Exec of Surrey Heartlands Integrated Care System. So you're quite right to say, what on earth's an ICS? Because we had a CCG and a PCT, and I can promise you, we'll have another lot, won't we? So what I want to talk to you today about is what makes this iteration different, how we are working differently and why it matters. So an ICS is a partnership. It's an integrated care system. And Nina and I work in Surrey Heartlands, and we look after a population of 1.1 million, which is nearly everybody that lives in Surrey. What was that laugh? Who was the laughing at? Nearly everybody that lives in Surrey. There's another whole story about that, I can tell you. That's another day. And within our system, there are hospitals, there are community services, there are mental health trusts, there is an ambulance service, there are 104 GP practices, there are 25 primary care networks, there is nearly one county council, there are 11 district and boroughs, there are somewhere between 2,000 and 6,000 voluntary sector organisations, which always makes me sum up between 2,000 and 6,000. And the difference is that we are all working together to improve, and we have 4 aims that we're meant to do collectively. Number 1 is to improve the health and the healthcare. Number 2 is to improve the health outcomes. So let's make sure that people live better lives. It's not just live longer. Let's make sure that the lives they have are of better quality. Number 2, that we improve access to health and care. Number 3 is that we are efficient and productive. We are the NHS. We would be nothing if we were not constantly trying to be more efficient and more productive. And then the 4th one is interesting. So the 4th one is new. It is, as an integrated care system, one of our key asks is to improve, for the NHS to improve the financial sustainability within communities, which I think is really important and really interesting, because one of the things that I think I've learned over the last couple of years is actually, if you want to improve somebody's health outcomes, the best way to do it is to give them a job. So actually, if we start to create work and start to make sure when people are working that they have joy in the work that they do, actually we can do more good for them than any other weird or wonderful gold-plated pathway. And my other learning is actually in previous iterations of 3-letter acronyms have been very much the NHS working on its own. And that's why this partnership is so important, because if the NHS carries on working on its own, we can only ever improve people's health outcomes by 20%. And you will have heard Michael Marmot talking eloquently about this for decades. But it's this absolute understanding that unless we work across the wider determinants of health... Oh, hello! It's Leo. He does all our videos, which is just really nice. Sorry. So unless we work across all of the wider determinants of health, we cannot fulfil the ambitions that we have for our population. So, and it's obvious, isn't it? It doesn't matter how good a diabetes pathway, how good a cataracts pathway I've got. If somebody is frightened, if somebody is homeless, if somebody has an addiction problem, they are never going to achieve the outcomes that we could hope and that our population should demand, which is why we will work in partnership. Now, the other thing that has changed, so, we're coming out of COVID, aren't we? And I think one of the things I think we're just beginning to realise is just how angry people are. And I think the professions are angry. I think the public are angry, and that's manifesting itself in many, many ways. But one of the things that has been a real plus from COVID, I think, has been the vaccine programme, which enabled us to work in a completely different way, using data and working with communities to deliver an incredible vaccine programme in a way that we made sure that our most vulnerable in our populations received vaccinations in a way that we wouldn't. So in the olden days, well, for any kind of health intervention, I'd sit in my GP practice, I'd send a letter out going, come and get your blood pressure checked. And then nobody, the people that would come, and those that wouldn't come. So I'd send them another letter, and then after 3 letters go, tick, they're now exempt because I've sent them 3 letters and aren't I good? Yeah, well, obviously that's rubbish, isn't it? What we need to do is we need to understand what works for people within the context of their lives. And you'll hear people talk about population health management, which sounds terribly, well, I think it's about clear as mud, isn't it? But what we're talking about when we talk about population health management is working with our communities and listening to communities to understand what matters to them. And it's that big question, what matters to you rather than what I think matters, it's that rather than the other way around. And what help do you need? And that may be none, or it may be that it'll look 3 minutes, and how can we work together to do that differently, which comes back down to that spirit of partnership and listening in a way that I think the NHS as an organisation has not done well in the past. I think our local authority colleagues have done that better, and I think colleagues in the voluntary community and faith sector have done that in a completely different way that I think has changed my mindset enormously. So we've done a lot of work with IMM, and I think it's been some of the work that's had the biggest impact in Surrey, if I'm honest. But what it comes back down to is you start with data, you identify the areas of biggest need, because if you put blanket provision in across, it's like me sending out the letters to everybody come and get your blood pressure checked. It doesn't work, and actually you widen those health inequalities. So you need to understand your communities of greatest deprivation sometimes, but also your communities with the biggest gap in health outcomes. And sometimes those are geographical, and sometimes those are about populations. And that's where the intergenerational work is so powerful and so key. If we can bring together our young people with our really vulnerable elder population and start to create networks, because the other thing that COVID has done has left us with a population that are more isolated and more lonely, particularly those women that had babies during COVID and didn't have the networks that many of us had when we had our babies when they were young. So the reason I am hopeful and the reason why I am proud to be the Chief Exec of Surrey Heartlands ICS is because of this focus on people in places where they live rather than focus on organisations and different sectors. So thank you very much. Oh, it's not Nina.
So when in our participant panel, we thought, well, Nina said, I got a chance to ask a question of my boss. Let's go for it. So here we go.
So Claire, how do we identify who the most isolated people are in society, and how can we get them involved in the intergenerational projects?
Yeah. Thank you. So I think isolation, I think, is really interesting in terms of how you identify isolations. And I think often our most isolated people we don't know. So we work in Surrey. Many of our isolated people are probably some of our more elderly affluent people that are living in enormous houses in absolute isolation, but it looks on the surface of it that they are doing really well. Yeah. So and that's been one of our big challenges that we've talked about, is how do we access and it'll be, my parents are currently both alive, but even now, they're both in their late 80s, and they'll go, well, I'll go and help the old people. There is the element of how do we connect and help people that actually are isolated in a way that we are all proud. And it is, so how do we help people in a way that reinforces and builds their self-esteem and their self-respect so that they will come again and again, and then you then get the intergenerational work that then does that beautiful thing when you get that positive spiral and you get benefit from all people involved.
Great, thank you. Can I ask a question that comes up all the time?
Yes.
And it goes back to the conversation we had this morning where we were talking about social prescribing, which broadly a lot of intergenerational work can be said to fall under the umbrella of. I think the dilemma we all have all the time is that when we're looking particularly for funding from the NHS, we're told that the things we need to measure are reactive to health disease or reactive to illness rather than about proactive prevention of illness. So you want measures, not you, but the NHS want measures of how do we avoid hospital admissions or how do we speed up hospital discharge rather than investing in preventing and enable people to live well in the community. How do we overcome that sort of almost bias against the kind of evidence that we really want to be giving to unlock the funding?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a thing going on. Patricia Hewitt, who used to be Health Secretary under one of the last Labour governments, is leading a review at the moment called the Hewitt Review, funnily enough. And what she's looking at is helping the NHS move away from being centralised target bean counting into actually being really clear there are some things we have to do. And there are, particularly in the year before an election, we're going to have to make sure there's access to GP appointments, that ambulances arrive on time, and that people can get into hospital and don't wait for longer than however many weeks for their output report. Those are given, and we will have to do those. But the tenet of the report is to allow us to work locally to define the things that matter to us. And that will be much more around, so some of the stuff we're doing, Nina, is looking at how we can, the things that I am interested in to show that our services are working is better access and better continuity of care. But it's better experience of access. It isn't about how many weeks or how many hours you wait. It is actually, is the service that we're providing, is it right for you? So I think we have a climate where it's starting to shift. I think those measures are really hard because I don't think we have a consensus about how you can then do a comparable service, but we need help. So help us with measures that we can then use as gold standard and can introduce across ICSs.
Thank you. And I was going to come back to really a question for our research colleagues. One of the problems is that often academic research seems to take years, but what you want is evidence quicker than that. Do you have that problem in terms of how do you get evidence in a timely way that means you can make the investment now rather than wait for the end of a 3-year study?
Yeah, so I'm not an academic GP, I'm quite a pragmatic GP. So there is an element of defining, the thing I've learned over the years is being really clear at defining what success looks like before you start. So define the problem that you're trying to fix and then make sure you know that you have fixed it. So that's not a 10-year randomized controlled trial. That's just have I sorted out that problem that has been brought to me as something that people in Surrey care about, and are we clear how we would collectively agree that we have fixed it?